Hi, Lam. Lammy.
Hi.
What are we on again?
Okay, but it's just the two of
How
you.
are you, Lam?
Yeah, good. Baruch Hashem. Had my AstraZeneca today. My
Oh, I
second
had
one.
mine yesterday. How are you feeling?
Yeah, okay, fine. Good.
Did you get the message that I rang you, that I heard you gave an excellent shield the other night?
Say that again.
Hello? Did you get the message? I left you a message. I heard you got an excellent shield the other night.
Who was your informant?
I wrote to you. Oh, I told you. Sarah Muchnik told me, and then Sue Corbell told me today.
Oh, that's nice. Good.
Sue never goes on, but she said she did because she heard it was you, and she always likes your shield. She said you spoke about Pirkei Avot or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why didn't? No, I left you a message. It's all right. How
No,
things otherwise?
Didn't see it. Sorry, Sal.
Huh?
Didn't see it. Sorry.
How's everything else?
Yeah, good. Baruch Hashem.
Okay. Okay.
See you later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
There's voting in progress, but I can't hear your voice.
Because it's not
It's not in progress.
Yeah, the big stations. Near the city center, it's much quieter.
Didn't have the use that I was looking for.
No, that last one, it was, even for me, it was pretty far.
Yes, that's good.
It's really far.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon. To those of you in Israel, I hope you've had a smashing day so far, that you're making the most of our kind of exit from lockdown, and that everything is going well for you, wherever you happen to be. Our topic this evening is the increasing relevance of Birkat Hamazon. Benching is something that we all do. Some of us more often than others, because some of us eat bread more often than others, and that's something which we are going to refer to later on this evening. And what I'd like to do this evening is to understand the meaning of Birkat Hamazon in terms of the lessons that Birkat Hamazon contains, in particular for our time, because Birkat Hamazon is much more than just saying thank you to Hashem. It's not just about saying thank you. There is more to it than that. If it was just about saying thank you, it wouldn't be so long. And what I'd like to look at this evening is a little bit about the background to Birkat Hamazon, what it meant then, and what it means for us now in our times. And our starting point is from the Parsha. There are many people who move to Israel at this time of year. During the month of August, in order to start the new school year or the new work year after the summer holidays on the other side of the world. And the parashiyot at this time of year are just filled with beautiful psukim and beautiful sentiments for those who are on their way to Israel. Such as in source number 1. Ki Hashem Elokecha meviacha el eretz tova. For Hashem your God is bringing you to a good land. Eretz nachalei mayim ayonot utomot yosim b'bikar bahar. A land which has got all these different sources of water coming out from different directions. We're a nation which has just spent 40 years in the wilderness, and we're told about the springs of water and the well springs and the different types of water. This will be a land of water, we're told. And not only will it be a land of water, Eretz chita useora, v'gefen u'te'ena v'rimon, Eretz Zeit Shemen Udvash, a land of all these special species, a land of wheat and barley and the vine and figs and pomegranates and olives and dates, a land of all these beautiful fruits and produce. Eretz Asher lo b'miskenut tochal ba'lechem, it's a land where you're not going to be eating bread in poverty. Lo techsar kol ba, you will not lack anything in this land. Eretz Asher avaneh varzel u'meharareh tachsov nechoshet, a land whose stones are iron, and from its mountains you'll be able to hew copper, a land with natural resources. You're going to have water, produce, fruit, everything you can imagine, everything that you need, natural resources as well. And when you arrive in this land and you benefit from all of these blessings, then v'achalta, you should eat. V'savata, and you should feel full. Uveirachta et Hashem Elokecha, you should bless Hashem your God. Al haaretz hatova asher natan lach, for this good land that Hashem has given to you. And in terms of the pshat, the narrative, it could just be telling a story that this is what's going to happen. You're going to arrive in the land. You'll have these many things. You'll eat, you'll feel full, and you'll say thank you, and you'll bless Hashem. But Chazal, our sages, understand this to be a mitzvah, a commandment, that when you eat and you feel full, then you have to bless Hashem for the land. Now, there are different parts of benching which were developed at different stages or instituted and formalized at different stages in Jewish history. But there's one part of the benching whose birthday was this week or last Shabbat on Tu B'Av. This week, Tu B'Av was the anniversary of the institution of the fourth bracha of benching. If I will just pause myself for a moment, I have noticed that Shosh Klut is with us this evening. Now, it either means that Shosh gave her iPad to one of her friends in Melbourne, and one of her friends has joined the shiur in Shosh's name, or Shosha means you've joined us from Israel having made Aliyah, and I wish you a very, very big Mazal Tov on your Aliyah, and it's fantastic that you've arrived safely in Israel and that you're still joining us this evening. And so Shosh, you've arrived in an amazing country, and you need to thank Hashem for all the amazing things that you have inside this country. And there is a special anniversary this week for the fourth bracha of benching. Hi, Shosh. As we know in the Mishnah and Tanit in source number 2. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael kechamisha asar ba'av u'chiyom haKippurim. We've never had such good days as the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. What would happen on these days? Shebahen benot Yerushalayim yotzot b'chlei lavan she'olim shelo levayesh et mi she'en lo. On these days, the daughters of Yerushalayim would go out wearing borrowed garments so as not to embarrass anybody who didn't have. And the Mishnayot described how everybody would borrow garments from each other, so nobody would feel bad that they had to borrow clothes for the ball. Everybody was wearing borrowed clothes. Uvnot Yerushalayim yotzot, and the daughters of Yerushalayim would go out. V'cholot b'chramim, and they would dance in the vineyards. Uma hayu amrot, what would they say? Well, they'd call out to the young lads, Bachur, young fellows, Sana inechu re'eh. Ma'ata borer lecha, lift up your eyes and see, what do you choose? Al titen einacha b'noi, but don't pay attention to beauty. Ten einacha b'mishpacha, look at the family. Look at the values, look at the background. That's what you should be looking for in a partner. As it says in Mishlei, Sheker hachein v'hevel hayofi, Isha yirat Hashem hitit halal. Grace is falsehood and beauty is vanity. It is a woman who fears Hashem who should be praised. So Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, which was 6 days ago, if you're in Australia, and 5 days ago, if you're in Israel. On Tu B'Av, the girls would go out dancing. Now, why were they dancing? What prompted the celebrations? Were they just dancing in order to be matched up with the other fellows or the fellows who came around? No. The Gemara in Bava Batra, in source number 3, tells us why there was such celebration. And the Gemara says, Tanan Hatam, it's taught there. Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael k'chamisha asar ba'av v'chiyom haKippurim. As we've seen, it says in Mishnah that the best days that we can think of in Jewish times were the 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, and Yom Kippur. Bishloima Yom HaKippurim. I can understand why Yom Kippur is a happy day, why people would celebrate on Yom Kippur. Yom Slicha U'Mechila. It's the day of atonement and forgiveness and saying sorry. Yom Shenatnu Bo Luchot Achronot. It's the day on which we received the second set of Luchot. Yom Kippur. There's a lot to be happy about. What's so special about Tu B'Av? The main expression of Tu B'Av in our days is that we don't say Tachanun. And this year it fell on a Shabbos, so we didn't say Tachanun anyway. What's so special about Tu B'Av? Ela Chamisha Asar B'Av Mahi. What happened on Tu B'Av? The Gemara goes on to give 6 answers to the question. 6 things which happened on Tu B'Av. The 5th one is Rav Matna Amar Rav Matna says, Yom Shenatnu Harugei Beita Lekvura. It was on the 15th of Av that the martyrs who died in Beitar were allowed to be buried. The Amar Rav Matna, because Rav Matna says, Oto hayom shenatnu harugei Beitar lekvura, on the very same day that those who had been killed in Beitar were allowed to be buried, tiknu b'yavne hatov v'hameitiv. The 4th bracha of benching was established. Hatov v'hameitiv, who hativ, who meitiv, who yetiv, about how good Hashem is. Hatov, Hashem is good, shelo hisrichu. Miraculously, the bodies of these martyrs did not decompose. V'hameitiv, and Hashem performs good, shenatnu lekvura, they were allowed to be buried. So the 15th of Av, the anniversary of which was just a few days ago, is the anniversary of the establishment of the 4th bracha of benching. And that bracha was established when the martyrs of Beitar were allowed to be buried, and miraculously their bodies had not decomposed. What's going on there? The experts in Jewish history among us would obviously know what we're talking about, but for the rest of us, what's going on? A basic summary and explanation I'll bring you from Rav Melamed in his Pninei Halacha in source number 4. What happened was, Sha'achar Churban Beit HaMikdash Hasheni, post-destruction of the 2nd Beit Mikdash, Nir'ah haya lechora, she'ein od tikva levinyan ha'aretz v'Yerushalayim. It appeared that all hope had been lost in order to rebuild the land and Yerushalayim. After the destruction of the 2nd Beit HaMikdash, there was a period of tremendous depression and sadness. And spirits were so low in the Jewish nation. In fact, they were so low. And people asked, people had a problem benching. People struggled with the words of our benching where we bless Hashem ala aretz hatova, on the good land. How can we bless Hashem for the good land? We're in such a state of national destruction. People struggled with benching, as certain people have told me, and it's so understandable how when facing different challenges in people's lives, they sometimes struggle with certain words or certain sentiments in tefillah. They find it difficult to say those words because of what they're experiencing at that moment. And as a nation, we struggled with benching to thank Hashem for the land, but look how bad things are. Our sages saw a need that we needed an extra bracha to add something to benching in order to strengthen people's faith in Hashem. Now, Beitar Haita Ir Gdola b'Yehuda. Beitar was a major city in Yehuda, in Judea, which is part of Israel. V'hi Haita Birato Shel Bar Kochba. That was the city of Bar Kochba. Umimena kivu lahashiv et asma'ut l'Yisrael binyan hamikdash. And it was there in Beitar. It was the center of the attention, of the focus, where they had, through the Bar Kochba revolt in the years 132 to 135, the attempts to return Jewish sovereignty and to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. I asked one of my students a few weeks ago, what happens between 132 and 135? The answer I was hoping for was the Bar Kochba revolt. The answer they gave was 133 and 134, which is also true. But what happened from 132 to 135 was the Bar Kochba revolt. But what happened? Ucheshenafla v'nechrava nigda'a keren Yisrael. But when that revolt failed and fell and was destroyed, our entire national pride was cut down. V'gavru hatzarot ma'od, and we had terrible suffering. V'gazra malchut harsha'a lachrot et Yerushalayim, and the wicked rulers decreed to plow Yerushalayim. V'lishnot et shmot ha'aretz v'Yerushalayim, and to change the names of the land and the name of Yerushalayim, kedei la'abed et zichron Zichran min ha'olam, to completely obliterate their memory from the world. But od gazru shelo likvor et harogei Beitar, and they also decreed not to bury the martyrs of Beitar. So we have a time of national desperation, of depression. Bar Kochba provides people support. Bar Kochba provides hope for a better future. Bar Kochba crashes, fails. Some people said he was the Mashiach. That's how confident they were. But he's cut down. Our pride is cut down. There's terrible suffering and things get even worse. And then V'achar Zman, a while later, Nitmana Melech Chadash, when the new king was appointed, Hutar likvor et harugim, permission was given to bury the dead. Umatsuan, when that happened, and Matsuan they found, Ki nasalehem nes shelo hisrichu, they found a miracle that these bodies had not decomposed. So there's a miracle. The bodies had not decomposed. That was something which was a glimmer of hope. It was a miracle from Hashem in the midst of all of this darkness. And that was a source for the people of great belief that things can be okay, that Hashem hasn't forsaken us, that Hashem hasn't forgotten us, that we will have a bright future as a nation. And so on the day that the martyrs of Beitar were allowed to be buried, and we had the miracle that their bodies were intact, our sages instituted the fourth bracha of benching, which anniversary therefore fell in this past week on the 15th of Av. That is where the fourth bracha of benching came from. This explains an interesting halachic anomaly in the middle of benching. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this halachic note because it's a Thursday night and not a Tuesday afternoon, but just in case anybody ever wondered. Why, in the middle of benching, do we say Amen to our own bracha? Amen. We each say Amen to ourselves. What's going on there? The Shulchan Aruch explains in source number 5. After somebody concludes the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim, Amen achar birkat atzma, a person needs to answer Amen to their own bracha. Why? Because it is the end of benching according to Torah law. Because that fourth bracha of benching isn't from the Torah. As we saw, it was from our sages. It's Drabanan. It was added later on in history. So the first 3 brachot of benching are from the Torah. When we conclude that, we say Amen. Amen is to acknowledge that benching is over midoraita from the Torah perspective. And then we continue with the fourth bracha of Hatov v'Hameitiv, which is the Rabbanan. That's why we say Amen to our own bracha. But there was a concern. If everybody knows this, I mean, I can tell you tonight, but if everybody who's not attending our shiur tonight knew about this, what will people do? They'll reach Bonei Bracha Mai Yerushalayim, Amen. They'll close their siddur. They'll say, thank you very much. From a Torah level, we've finished benching, and off you go. And therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, Amen zeh yomarnu belachash. Say the Amen quietly. Don't make too much of a deal about that Amen. Kedei shelo yargishu shebrikat hatov meitiv eina d'oraita v'yizal zeluba. You don't want people to realize that hatov v'hameitiv isn't from the Torah, and you don't want people to disrespect it. So it's a funny thing. The Shulchan Aruch says, say Amen, so that we know from now on it's no longer d'oraita. But don't say it too loud, because you don't want anyone to know that. It's a bit of a juggling act in the Shulchan Aruch to acknowledge the different parts of benching without disrespecting this fourth bracha. Practically, the Ramah tells us for Ashkenazim, Haggah, v'nira dedavka k'shemavarech levad ve'en onin amar onin amen achar shar brachot. This is specifically when you're benching by yourself. This is when this applies. However, aval kishem mezamnin, when somebody else is leading the benching, onin alav kishar amen shonin al birkot rishonot, brachot rishonot. Then you do answer amen to someone else who's leading the benching. If you don't understand it, it's fine, because in a moment we'll give the bottom line. Even though the person benching themselves also says Amen. It doesn't stand out so much. Because other people also say Amen with him. So the Rama says that you can't say Amen out loud if someone else is leading the benching. The bottom line is, for Ashkenazi customs, it's quite straightforward. To say it out loud. Even the one who's leading the benching, when we lead the benching, that's why we say it out loud, because we do need to acknowledge that this is a different part of benching, and if somebody else is leading the benching, it's not so difficult to discern. Either way, why do we say Amen in the middle of benching? We say Amen in the middle of benching because this fourth bracha was instituted later on. It was instituted this week in history in response to the release of the Harugei Beitar. What do we see? We see that benching is much more than saying thank you for food. Benching is about connecting us to the land of Israel. It is about allowing us to appreciate the land. It's about highlighting Hashem's kindness to us. And if throughout the years of exile we've been able to bench, even with the fourth bracha, which helps, today that we've returned to the land, Birkat HaMazon is a different prayer. Now that we've returned to the land, Birkat HaMazon is that much more meaningful. We can bless Hashem ala Haaretz HaTovah inside Haaretz HaTovah. We can bless Hashem for the produce of the land, having eaten the produce of the land. We can appreciate the natural resources of the land of Israel. Birkat HaMazon is much more relevant now than it was 100, 200, or 300 years ago, because its focus is not just to bless Hashem, but it's to bless Hashem al Haaretz HaTovah. Now in this week's parasha, once Moshe Rabbeinu has told us Israel's amazing, you're going to a wonderful country, you're going to have natural resources, you're going to a good land. This wonderful praise of the land is followed by warning. And then Moshe tells us in source number 6, Yishamer lecha, watch out. Pen tishkach et Hashem Elokecha, lest you forget Hashem your God. Levilti shmor mitzvotav u'mishpatav v'chukotav asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. And you'll end up not keeping his mitzvot and his laws and his statutes, his rules that I'm commanding you today. Pen tochal v'savata, what's going to happen? Lest you eat, you're going to feel full. Uvatim tovim tivneh, you'll build nice big houses for yourselves. V'yashavta, and you'll dwell there. Uvkarcha v'tzoncha yirbeyun, v'chesed v'zahav yirbelach. Oh, you'll have increased cattle and flock and gold and silver. You're going to come to this land, Moshe says, and you're going to eat and feel full in your nice big houses with all your wonderful wealth. And everything you have will be multiplied. What might happen then? Baram levavecha, your heart will become uplifted, haughty, arrogant. V'shachachta et Hashem Elokecha, you will forget the Lord your God, Hamotziacha me'eretz Mitzrayim mebeit avadim, who brings you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of servants. Moshe says Israel's going to be amazing. You're not going to lack anything. You're going to have natural resources. You'll have all this natural wealth. It'll be fantastic. But watch out, because the danger of all of this wealth and all of this affluence is that you'll become arrogant and haughty. You'll take credit for it yourself. You're going to forget Hashem. V'amarta bilvavecha, says a few psukim later, you'll say in your heart, Kochi v'otzem yadi asali et kol hachayil hazeh. It was my strength, my power, my talent, my genius, my skill, which has given me all of this wealth. In source number 7, the Meshech Chochmah connects these two passages. And he says as follows: Kishochel v'sava, Asu alu leva'et. The time when a person is most vulnerable to kicking out and rejecting Hashem is when they've eaten and they're full. U'kamo hakatuv, as the Torah says, pentochal v'savata, etc. As we've said, lest you eat, you'll become full. V'shachachtet Hashem Elokecha. That's when you're going to forget the Lord your God. So what is the antidote? What should we do? How can we avoid this problem of affluenza? Lachain tzivah Hashem yitbarach. Therefore Hashem commanded, Kisha yochal v'yispa, when a person eats and is full, what should you do? Yazkir Shem Elokim betodah. You should mention Hashem's name in thanks. V'yevarchenu, and we should bless him. V'yizkor, and then we should remember, Ki hu hanoten lecha koach lasot chayot. It is Hashem who gives you the power to make all of this wealth. U'miyado lokeach ha'ochel lemalot nafsho ki yirav. And we didn't earn this money. We didn't make this food. This wasn't us who did all of these things. We're taking this from Hashem. What the Meshech Chochmah is saying is that benching is the antidote to the arrogance that can come along with affluence. Benching is the way that we can ensure that we're not going to get carried away with our wealth, because when we eat and we feel full and we're at risk of feeling so proud of ourselves, it's davka then that you bless Hashem and you remember that He's the one who gave you this land and He's the one who blesses you in this way. And that's why straight after telling us about benching, it says, watch out, you're going to forget Hashem. Etc. You're going to eat, feel full. You're going to become arrogant. You'll forget. Therefore, you need to remember Hashem, that He's the one who gives you all of these blessings. The Meshech Chochmah says that this passage, immediately following the mitzvah to bench, is explaining benching to us. Why do we bench? Why do we need to bench? So that we shouldn't harden our hearts and be stubborn and not acknowledge the ways of Hashem and testify to His presence in this world. And the time to do this, the time to acknowledge Hashem, is when we are full, not when we're hungry. It's when we're full that we have to say, Baruch Hashem, that we are full. It is Hashem who is looking after us. So why do we bench? Benching is much more than a thank you. Benching is connecting us to the land, and benching is connecting us to Hashem who gave us the land. Benching is there to ensure that we don't get carried away with our own success, and we attribute our successes and our wealth to Hashem. We have a similar concept, which I'll briefly share with you back in the book of Breshit. You see, at the beginning of Perek Vav of Breshit, we read, Achar hadvarim ha'ele, after these words, Hayadvar Hashem al Avram b'machazeh lemor. The word of Hashem appeared to Avram in a vision, saying as follows, Al tira Avram, fear not Avram, Anochi magen lach, I'm going to look after you, Scharcha harbe me'od, your reward is very great. So Hashem appeared to Avram once upon a time and He said, Avram, don't fear, don't worry, you're going to have a great reward, I'm going to look after you. Why was Avram scared? What happened that led Avram to being fearful, that required Hashem to come along and say, don't worry, I'm going to look after you? Well, this was Achar Hadvarim Ha'ele, after these things. After what things? What happened? What happened was what we find in source number 9. What we read about in the previous paragraph, in the previous chapter, was the First World War. It was the battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. The great regional powers were involved. Avram Avinu steps in and intervenes. Vayishma Avram heard, ki nishba achiv, that his brother had been taken captive. This is a reference to Lot. He brought together his group of followers, soldiers, members of his household. Altogether there were 318 of them, and they pursued to Dan. Vayichalek alehem laila hu v'avadav, vayakem vayardifem ad chova Hashem ismol Damasek. They were incredibly successful, and they caught up with them, and they smote them, and they pursued them. Vayashev et kol harachush. In this battle, this major regional conflict, they took spoil, everything. V'gam et Lot achiv, and Lot his brother, u'rechush heshiv, and his property. V'gam et anashim, and the women, and Betam, and the people. Avram intervened in this major world war with a tiny force of 318 people. Some people say it was just Eliezer. Avram was hugely successful, brilliantly successful, became exceptionally wealthy. Avram understood the danger of success, and Avram understood the danger of wealth. And it's Davka when Avram was at his highest point of success, he was scared, and he was concerned, and he was worried about the impact this could have. And therefore, achar hadvarim ha'eleh, after these things happened, Hashem appeared to Avram and he said, don't be afraid. I'll look after you and everything will be okay. It's Davka when we're so successful that we have to be careful. It's Davka when we're at the peak of our achievements that we're vulnerable and we have to be concerned. We don't have to be scared. We should be concerned and we should be careful to ensure that our successes don't make us arrogant, that we don't get carried away with our successes. We should be ambitious. We should be successful. We should aspire to do the best that we can in this world. But when we do so, we should understand that it's the bracha that comes from Hashem. And Davka at those times of success, to be careful. And that's the message of benching that Moshe gives us in this week's parasha. He says, you're going to an amazing country with water, with food, with produce, with blessing, with natural resources. You're going to be really successful. Therefore, you need to bench. And benching, and the meaning of benching would ensure that your success won't go to your head, and you have a mechanism, a regular prayer which you say, which allows you to regularly acknowledge the source of your blessing in this world. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch believes that there is a specific concern when eating bread over other types of food, which would warrant us to bench over bread instead of other types of food. Because we don't bench after every single meal, not the full benching midoraita. It's specifically after meals where we've had a certain amount of bread. Why bread? What's so special about bread that if you've had bread, you bench? If you didn't have bread, you don't bench? Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch explains in source 2. Halechem hu totzar shel hateva v'shel hasechel ha'enoshi hasholet ba'olam. There are two partners in creating bread. Bread is the produce of nature, but it's also the produce of human intellect taking control of nature. Therefore, Rav Hirsch believes that bread is a symbol for human intellect taking control, of human dominion over the world. Bread is a symbol of our human advancement and achievements. And it's a symbol of the general way in which a person is able to develop the means in order to survive in this world. So what's the danger of bread? V'hinei, behold, the danger is that we may consider and think to ourselves, shekach yitzirato shel ha'adam hu hatnai hayachid lekiyumo ha'artzi. That this is the way a person is being created, that we are the reason that we survive in this world. We're amazing. We're the best. We're geniuses, especially if we're Jewish, if we're Israeli. Aren't we just the best in the world at everything? And then we are in danger of forgetting who's really the boss, who's really in control. That it's really the leadership of Hashem. Shehi hagorem harishon shamazono shel adam. that the true original source of our sustenance in this world is Hashem. So bread symbolizes human progress, which isn't a negative thing in and of itself, but it has a danger that comes along with it. Mishum kach, therefore, what did Hashem do? Holichatanu Hashem 40 shana bamidbar. Hashem took us through 40 years in the wilderness. Hashem gave us an experience in our infancy as a nation, which conditioned us for future experience in this world. And therefore, these were almost artificial conditions, lab conditions, taken out of this world in order to be given certain strengths and certain beliefs and certain resilience so that then we could be put back into the world. The Midbar experience, those 40 years, were a bit like a greenhouse, where the sapling is placed artificially inside a greenhouse so it can grow strong roots and be able to survive afterwards when it's returned from the greenhouse into the natural world. What was life like in the Midbar? Sham hayinu znuchim mikol hagormim hamesapkim la'adam et lachmo min hateva v'alidei koach ha'adam. There were 40 years where we were entirely distanced from all of the tools that give a person bread from nature with human involvement in this world. I don't feel a responsibility to translate them exactly because Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch wasn't writing in Hebrew anyway. So it was in the Midbar that we were given an experience where we couldn't make bread, where we didn't have the water, and we didn't have the produce, and we didn't have the ability to have that belief that we're the ones who feed ourselves in this world. With our very eyes in the wilderness, over many years, we saw the providence of Hashem, Hazan, u'mefarnes et bru'av, who sustains and brings sustenance, who nourishes and gives sustenance to his creations. And there were 40 years without bread. There were 40 days of manna that Hashem had ordered for us. 40 years in the wilderness were there to condition us as a nation so that we would understand our food comes from Hashem. And having developed that belief over 40 years, we were ready to move on into the land, and we were ready to make the transition from manna to bread. But while we eat bread, and we still eat bread today, we do so with an awareness of Hashem's role in the world. When was that inserted into our Jewish DNA? It became part of our consciousness through that Midbar experience. So we needed 40 years without bread to enable us to then move on and eat bread with the correct attitude. Benching, therefore, is a very, very important tefillah, which we say. Benching provides us a global perspective, a historical perspective. It connects us to the land, it connects us to Hashem, and it reminds us of our place in this world. But while this is a very, very, very important tefillah, and I believe it is, I don't want to say more relevant nowadays than ever, because there have been previous great times in history, but I'm going to say that Birkat Hamazon is increasingly relevant in our times. We have a challenge in our times. And the challenge in our times is that we are benching less and less. And I'm not talking about the fact that people aren't benching when they're supposed to be benching. I'm talking about the problem that we're eating less and less bread. For example, this week on our Tuesday afternoon halacha shiur, we discussed the halachic requirement to make 100 brachot a day. And when the Mishnah Berurah lists our 100 brachot each day, there was an assumption that a person's eating at least 2 meals with bread each day in order to help them reach the tally of 100 or more than 100. A meal was bread. It's just a question of what you had with bread. Our eating styles have changed. Our lifestyles have changed. And therefore, it's possible that a person hardly ever benches on a weekday. Perhaps some of us never bench on a weekday, will only bench on a Shabbat. And the problem is that we've lost our daily reminder of Birkat HaMazon. And we've lost this regular reminder about our connection to Hashem and our connection to the land and our place in the world and the dangers of prosperity. Benching is really relevant and really important. It's becoming increasingly important, yet we're saying it less and less. And in this context, I'd like to share with you some words with which we will conclude this evening from Rav Yoel bin Nun. Rav Yoel bin Nun believes that a person should bench on a meal, even if it doesn't have bread. If Rav Yoel bin Nun would have a meal with a steak and some mashed potato and some greens, and he'd feel full, he would do Birkat HaMazon on that meal, even if he hasn't had bread. Now, this is not the normative halacha. It is not the halachic consensus, and I am not preaching that this is what we should do. But I'm fascinated in Rav Yoel bin Nun's approach, less for the technical halachic outcome, which I don't suggest people follow, but the reasoning behind it. And let's have a look at Rav Yoel bin Nun's plea, because I think there's a lot of value in listening to his claim. And he says as follows in source number 11. We are quickly in danger of forgetting all those troubles of the process of leaving Mitzrayim. We had those 40 years of conditioning, but the impact is wearing off. Im achilat man bamidbar, that experience of eating manna in the wilderness. And the danger is that we'll be in a place of will become steeped in the arrogance of wealth and success, and we will say, it is my power and the strength of my hand which has made this wealth for me. How do we avoid that? The Torah's response to this danger is benching. And indeed, benching is habracha hayechida shaTorah mechayebet befeirush. It is the only bracha that we have that the Torah explicitly commands us. There are 100 brachot a person makes each day. Only one of them is explicitly mentioned in the Torah. That is this bracha of benching. Benching is such a crucial bracha for us, and it's there to avoid arrogance. V'chashuv lahadgish, Rav Yoel bin Nun writes, and it's important to emphasize, she'ein zo rak bracha ala mazon. This isn't just a bracha about food. El al yetziat Mitzrayim, it's a bracha about leaving Egypt, vala aretz hatovan, the good land, etc. Anachnu nimtzaim kayom b'diuk b'matzav hazeh. Now, in our times, we are exactly in this situation, the situation which Moshe Rabbeinu described, of entering the land and achieving tremendous success. Yes, adayin anu nilchamim neged ha'amim hatzorim otanu misaviv v'tochenu. Yes, we still have wars and we're still fighting against the enemies from without and within. Aval rubeinu kvar yoshim batim tovim. Most of us have reached the stage in Israel of sitting in nice houses. Ochlim lasava migudolei artzeinu. We're eating till we're full from the produce of our land. Ulemechzevei yam hamelach kvar nosafim mechzevei hagaz b'yam hagadol. In addition to the place where you hew rock from, the quarry, and to the quarry of Yam HaMelech, we can also now add in the natural resources of gas which we have in our land. And what's happened is, lots of great people are filling themselves up with meat and fish. They're not doing the Torah blessing of benching, but because they say, we didn't eat bread. People are stuffing themselves with food in the good land in their nice big houses, and they're not benching because they didn't have bread. I also meet Torah sages who only bench on Shabbat. And I quote to them the wording of the Rambam. It's a mitzvah of the Torah, positive mitzvah to bench after you've eaten mazon. And it's a Torah obligation if you feel full. V'lo chatav pat. It doesn't say bread in Rambam. Ela mazon, it talks about mazon, food in general. And so Rav Yoel ben Nun says to these people, Lefachot, at the very least, tosifu birkat nodeh. At least say the bracha of nodeh from benching. B'li chatima, without saying the actual bracha, at least say the content of the bracha. Acharei borei nefashot rabot. Say something. Rav Yoel ben Nun decries our modern state of benching in Israel, where we've reached the good land, we've got the natural resources, we're having wonderful meals, we're filling ourselves on all of these foods, and we're not benching. But benching is such an important part of that process to allow us to enjoy the land and lead successful lives and have lives of prosperity without forgetting Hashem. And he concludes with a rather harsh social critique. And he says, poor people, he says, eat bread. Poor people who don't need a reminder that brachot come from Hashem and don't need the reminder of the dangers of wealth because they're not wealthy. Those are the ones who are eating bread every day. And those are the ones who have this daily reminder. Ha'ashirim, the wealthy people, those who need benching, ochlim basar l'sava, fill themselves up on meat, v'shochachim, and they forget Hashem. And then what do the wealthy people do? V'achar kach menalim diyunim melumadim ala matzuka chevratit. And then they sit on these panels in Tel Aviv. I added the words panels in Tel Aviv. And then they sit on these panels and they have these intellectual discussions about social challenges. Oy labusha. Woe to the shame of this situation. Thus, Rav Yoel ben Nun himself does bench after a hearty meal, even if he has not had bread. And while that is not the normative halachic approach, I think his reasoning is genuine food for thought for us, which is that the aim of benching is for us to have reminders of Hashem. And when we eat and we feel full, it's an important reminder for us. And so, when we do have bread and when we do bench, let us learn some of the lessons of benching and acknowledge their relevance to our time. Benching is, yes, you thank Hashem for the food, but benching is about leaving Egypt. Benching is about arriving in the land of Israel. And benching, most of all, is the way that we can ensure that we will enjoy Hashem's blessings in this world without becoming arrogant. And Bezrat Hashem, may we all join Shosh as soon as possible in order to share some bread in the land of Israel and to bless Hashem al ha'aretz hatovah for his wonderful land that he's given us while we are all together in ha'aretz hatovah. Wish you all Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.
Go, Rav Danny. Shabbat Shalom.
תודה רבה.